The rules of war are over. Russia made a massive, unforgivable mistake by launching one of its most horrific attacks against Ukrainian children. Payback was immediate and absolute. Just hours after the attack, we got a report that the United States lifted key restrictions against Ukraine. British and French missiles are now unleashed to strike deep inside Russia, hitting refineries and military factories that Putin cannot defend. But you see, retaliation didn't stop there. U.S. Hasno enacted back-breaking sanctions against Rosneft and Luke Oil, two of Russia's biggest oil companies. Russian stock market is melting down and Putin's furious. But he has no one to blame but himself. By targeting Ukrainian children, he forced the West to declare that time for talking is over. It's the moment war became personal. This all started yesterday morning when Putin carried out one of the most horrific attacks of this war. Russian drones flew into a kindergarten at 10:30 a.m. Ukrainian time. This was right in middle of a school day in the morning. We have footage of the strike, and we have footage of the rescue mission that first responders carried out after these strikes. But even then, Russians are denying this all, claiming that this whole kid stuff was a setup by NATO, and this was in fact a NATO site. But let me show you the evidence, and you decide for yourself. And here we also have the aftermath, where first responders are trying to evacuate all children. We can hear kids calling out for their moms. Now, according to some Russian propagandists, this was Russia's revenge. So you may be asking, revenge for what? Well, let me show you. Earlier that morning, Ukrainian armed forces, British, supplied Storm Shadow to take down a Russian chemical plant in Bryansk. This plant is a crucial facility in Russia's military-industrial complex. It produces gunpowder, explosive, combat charges, rocket fuel, and so on. Russia started this invasion. That means Ukraine was well within their rights to destroy this plant. And in revenge, Russia is targeting kindergarten kids. But according to Russians, kids are all just actors. And this was a NATO facility. But the thing is, one thing Putin forgot was that even though he lost all compassion, the rest of the world still has it. And this is where he kind of missed that First Lady deeply cares about Ukrainian children. It's important to remind everyone watching that just a few months ago, back in July, President Trump publicly admitted that it was the First Lady, Melania, who convinced him that Putin's promises are not really worth anything. Take a listen. I go home, I tell the First Lady, and I spoke to Vladimir today. We had a wonderful conversation. She said, "Oh, really? Another city was just hit." So it's like look on top of this when Putin came to Alaska first. Lady had a personal letter delivered to him, and it had a very specific message. It asked for Putin to protect Ukrainian children, and that's something the Russian army really has not been doing. They've been kidnapping Ukrainian kids and moving them to Russia and just having random families adopt them. Well, I guess what Putin did yesterday was a bit too far. Well, that's because just hours after that strike, we got this bombshell report from Wall Street Journal. United States lifts key restrictions on Ukraine's use of European long-range missiles. The move coincides with a Trump push to pressure Moscow into talks on ending the war. Now, this is where I want to clarify the details because the wording on this report is very specific, and that's for a reason. The U.S. is not giving permission to strike inside Russia because Ukraine already has that permission. They've been using drones to already go inside, but the wording says U.S. lifts key restriction. So the question rises, what was that restriction? You see, even though these missiles, they are European-made, mainly from UK or from France, they use targeting data that is still supplied by the United States. So after President Biden, that targeting data was held back, meaning we did not tell Ukraine that they cannot strike inside Russia. What the process was that if Ukraine identifies a target, they would have to request permission from their U.S. counterpart. And then that request goes all the way up to Pete Hegseth, who's Secretary of War, Secretary of Defense. And if he approves it, Ukraine can hit that target using U.S. data. But if he doesn't approve it, Ukraine cannot hit that target. Even though they have the missile, they have UK's permission who made the missile. They don't have the targeting data. That's the big thing. That U.S. now doesn't decide on that privilege, or I guess I can't remember the right word, but that ability to approve and reject a strike is not with Pete Hegseth anymore. But rather that power now goes to top U.S. general in Europe, and that is General Alexis Greenwich. He's also the NATO commander right now, and in my opinion, it's a lot better that he's the one deciding because he's a lot more pro-Ukraine than Pete Hegseth. That's not to say Hegseth is anti-Ukraine, but there have been some miscommunication between the administration and Pentagon, and we don't know who's causing that miscommunication. So technically speaking, U.S. is not giving permission to strike inside Russia. All U.S. is doing is providing the targeting data for targets that Ukraine is picking out, and Ukraine is using British-made missiles. Now, this technicality is important because just hours after this report came out, President Trump put out this statement. Please. You had a trick social post earlier this afternoon talking about a Wall Street Journal report as a fake story. Yeah. It's sort of Wall Street Journal is fake. Less fake on financial than it is on gossip. Can you just confirm that my understanding of what's happening is accurate? As I understand it, that story framed it like we had just lifted the U.S. a restriction on intelligence. No, it said that I gave Ukraine permission to shoot missiles deep into Russia. I didn't do that. Second of all, they're not using our missiles. They're using, I think, European missiles are from someplace, but they're not using ours. And what they do, I don't control that. But I do control our missiles. They're not shooting our missiles in. It was a fake story. Wall Street Journal does a lot of fake stuff. Now, Trump is not the biggest fan of Wall Street Journal, but report doesn't say what he's claiming it says. It never says that, hey, Trump gave permission. It's saying USA's lifted the restriction, which is true because we saw a storm shadow strike happening on a Russian facility that we talked about that. Started the video, and that's only possible if U.S. is providing the targeting data. But for me, it's funny that we're now leaning into this talking point where we're basically claiming, hey, it's not the United States that carrying out this strike, it's the European countries. It's Ukraine and it's everyone else. But notice, because I feel like that's kind of what Russia does. It's Russia talking point where you use half-truths to push your side. And now Russia is getting taste of their own medicine. Now, I say that not because of just this statemental one. He also made a similar statement later in the same press conference. Take a listen to this. And we're not selling any weapons to Ukraine. We're selling them to NATO.